Woo, woo! The low moan of a conch shell drifted through the open window in Sarah Turner's kitchen. Leaving a pan of bacon cooking on the coal-burning stove, she peered out the window. Although she saw no sign of the canal boat, the sound of its conch shell could be heard for a mile, and signaled the boat would be approaching the lock soon. "A boat's coming. Would you mind finishing the bacon while I go out to open the lock gate?" Sarah asked her mother-in-law, who stood at the counter, cracking eggs into a ceramic bowl. "Sure, I can do that," Maria said with a weary-looking nod. A chunk of her nearly gray hair had fallen loose from the back of her bun, and her dark eyes looked dull and puffy. Sarah's heart went out to Maria, who looked more tired than usual. Sarah feared that caring for the children was too much for her mother-in-law, especially since she'd begun having trouble with her vision. Woo, woo, woo! The sound of the conch shell drew closer. Sarah hurried across the room. She was almost to the door when her 8-year-old son, Sam Jr., raced up to her, bright-eyed and smiling from ear to ear. "Can I help you raise the lock, Mama?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Sorry, Sammy, but you're not strong enough for that." "I am so strong enough. I ain't no weakling, Mama." When the boy pulled his shoulders straight back and puffed out his chest, a lock of sandy blonde hair fell across his forehead. "Of course you're not a weakling, but raising and lowering the lock is hard work, even for me." His blue eyes darkened as he tipped his head and looked up at her with furrowed brows. "How come you always treat me like a baby?" Sarah blew out an exasperated breath. "I don't treat you like a baby. I just know that you're not strong enough to raise and lower the lock. Now, if you really want to help, run back to the parlor and keep an eye on your little sister and brother for me." "Okay." Sammy thrust his hands in his pockets, turned, and shuffled out of the room. With a shake of her head and a silent prayer for guidance, Sarah hurried outside. As the flat-roofed wooden boat approached, she cranked open the upper wicket gates to fill the lock. Once it was filled with water, she lowered the upper head gate, and the boat was drawn into the stone walls of the lock. Then the upper head gates were raised and the upper wicket gates were closed, so that no more water could enter the lock. Next, the lower wicket gates were opened and the water rushed out of the lock. Following that, the lower gates were opened, and the boat was drawn out and into the lower level of the canal. Finally, Sarah opened the main gate to let the boat out and on its way. As the boat moved on down the canal, Sarah headed back to the house, arms aching and forehead beaded with perspiration. This was hard work, too hard for a 27-year-old woman like her, and definitely too hard for a young boy. But she had no other choice. When her husband Sam died nearly a year ago, she'd taken over his job of tending the lock in order to provide for her 3 children. She shuddered, thinking of the accident that had taken Sam. A boat had broken loose from where it was tied and floated to the lock where it had jammed. Sam and several others had been trying to free the boat. While Sam was standing on top of the lock, his foot slipped, and he tumbled into the water. The boat shifted, and Sam's body had been crushed between the boat and the lock. Lock tending could be dangerous work, and Sarah had to remind herself every day to be very careful in all that she did during the process of letting the boats in and out. Sarah was grateful that Sam's mother lived with them and had helped to care for the children ever since Sam died. But with Maria's health failing, Sarah couldn't help but worry. She thought about her own mother, who died of pneumonia a few months ago. Papa had given up canaling and sold his boat soon after that. He'd moved to Easton and taken a job at one of the factories where he'd previously worked during the winter. Sarah missed seeing both of her parents, but she understood Papa's need for a change. Sarah leaned wearily against the side of the lock tender shed and sighed. "Oh, Sam, I miss you so much. How I wish you were still here." Tears slipped from her eyes. How many more things would change in her life? How much longer would Maria be able to help out? Could she and the children make it on their own if Maria moved back to Easton, where she used to live with Sam's brother Roger? Sarah knew that's where Maria belonged, but could she convince her of that?